Hello, everyone, and good evening. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, please hit like, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as we're constantly adding new shows and cross streams constantly. Also, don't forget, June 26th, we're going to be live and in person in Brooklyn at Project PARLOR. It's an event in conjunction with Sublation Media. Ben Burgess will be there. The homie Norm Finkelstein will be there. Margaret Kimberly of Black Agenda Report as well. It's free, people, so there's no excuse for y'all not to show up. Also, if you guys did not know, my co-host was a guest on Brianna Joy Gray's Bad Faith podcast, where he made a new fan of the show, LeVar Burton. Every time Pascal does a show, you get a new celebrity fan. Amazing. And I will be a guest on the Majority Report tomorrow, June 17th. And I'll be a guest on Doug Lane's Sublation Media show as well. So once you're done here, please go check out Pascal with Brianna Joy Gray. That being said, let me bring in my homie, my co-host, my dog, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. What's going on?
You know, I told you this. I'm sure people I sound a little different, congested a little. I had the booster shot on Monday, and it has totally kicked my behind. That last booster shot, and I have been extremely under the weather. I'm actually extremely under the weather right now.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Well, I appreciate you calling to check up on me the last few days.
I definitely have been doing that. I want everyone to understand that Jason has been not only putting in overtime with doing our video essays, but we had to give him the weekend off last weekend so he could take some time off the rest to see his son and his family and friends in the Bay Area and in California. But Jason has been doing the rounds. He will be doing Majority Report tomorrow. He will be on Sublation's podcast with Doug Lane. We're getting ready to go to our meet and greet in Brooklyn on the 26th. So, you know, the brother has been out here trying to do his thing, and now he's got this booster shot that's kicking his behind. So let's definitely.
And I have no water.
Yeah.
That's what's really frustrating, is that the water's been out for 26 hours.
Yeah, the Mexican plumbing is not really hooking with the Mother Earth.
It has not been kind. Speaking of not being kind, let's bring in everybody's favorite middle manager of the Death Star that gives the worst Stormtrooper reviews, Deep State Cuba.
It's been a little testy lately because you've been watching that show ObiWan Kenobi.
I have been watching the hell out of it.
Yeah, and the way that it depicts the Empire and the Inquisitor Corps, I just gotta say, wow. Somebody call Johnny Depp's lawyer, because this is some Amber Heard level defamation. Outrageous. To think that there would be that many lapses of routine security protocols on a highly secured facility, absurd. You don't pass Stormtrooper 101 if you're just waving people in because they intimidate you a little. And the notion that Third Sister or any one of the Inquisitors would torture Leia, would treat Leia in that way, nowhere, no Imperial officer would ever put their hands on that, on a child of royalty like that. Like, the outrageous. First, you have to get like Imperial approval before you move in on landed aristocrats or titled royals of any kind, any planet. And finally, like, just the depiction of the Grand Inquisitor as this bald, gelatinous, pasty tyrant. That's alopecia, people. Come on.
Wow, alopecia people.
It's an autoimmune disorder, and you should show some compassion.
You are a damn fool. We have a super chat question that I never get on this show, but
mad technical. This is mad technical, dude.
This is a technical question that I'll be more than happy to answer every time. My setup live, you're gonna laugh. All I have is a switch pedal because I use 3 different amp heads. And I did have a big muff at one point in time, not the Russian big muff. I had some reissue big muff.
What is with this big muff? This sounds sexually
it's a fuzzy pedal that gives you kind of that real 70s rock fuzzy tone, depending on how you use it.
M2 Son is getting very uncomfortable. She heard Russian big muff. She was like, "What? What are we doing? A sexism?"
Because if you've talked,
that was Jason's KGB code name.
Some people are deep throat. I was big muff. And that's all I use. I don't and one of my switchers would go to a clean amp for any clean things I would play. And I actually just sold that amp. It was a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe that I set up as my clean tone. And at one point in time for recording, I did put a big muff in front of my Marshall because I heard that was the Kill 'Em All tone. I played with that for a little bit. But that's literally it for pedals. I don't really do a lot of pedals because it's just too many things that can go wrong live. So I just have a 3-channel switcher, a tuner, and is that all I had? Because I haven't played live in so long. And that's it. That's all I had live.
Do you have a brand of guitar that's your favorite to use?
No. I've been
Is that
so many
a stupid
guitars
question to ask a guitarist?
No. Some people have brands that they prefer. ESP was the brand that I used more often than not, but I've found so many guitars and stuff put together, Franken guitars and stuff like that. The only thing for me is that the strings I use are 73 to 13 gauge strings and EMG pickups and drop F sharp. That's like all you need to know about guitar for me.
Can you play acoustic guitar too?
Yeah. Yeah. It goes to 11. Yes, it does go to 11. I'm one of those people that dime shit all the way out. But yeah, I'm more than happy to answer guitar questions because I just don't get too many guitar questions on the show. Now, when I'm recording, I actually use a lot more effects, and I will play with every pedal and effect I can find to get weird sounds.
I actually had a guitar question I wanted to ask you because of something that came up in my timeline on social media, on Facebook. It was not a commercial, but it was kind of a video about Jimi Hendrix and a concert that he was doing in London. And it was saying how, like, amazing he was and how avant-garde. I've never had this conversation with you, but as a guitarist, how do you view Jimi Hendrix as a guitarist in terms of in the overall kind of arc of guitarists?
Me personally, I mean, he's sloppy.
Wow.
He was really, he knew he was sloppy. Him and Jimmy Page are two of the most sloppy guitar players you'll ever hear, but he's one of those guys that can take a bad note and bend it till it sounds right. And he kind of did whatever he wanted to do, and I think he redefined what you could do with an electric guitar at that time. That's my personal opinion. I think when you listen to Jimi Hendrix and you think about the era in which he came out of, especially he played in like doo-wop groups and stuff first, totally redefined the way that instrument was looked at. Like, you can't have Eddie Van Halen without Jimi Hendrix, in my opinion. But yeah, he was a sloppy player. We all know that.
When I was in college, there were dudes who were into like heavy music who were like literally deifying Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, he like I said, he redefined the way you look at the guitar. Right? Totally redefined it. It didn't sound like that until he made it sound like that, right? But it was a little sloppy.
He's Canadian.
I thought he was from Seattle and then escaped to Canada.
His parents I think were both Canadian born or Canadian citizens at least. And
in somewhere in Vancouver for him, right?
Yeah, there's a shrine. Yeah. And Summer, I didn't really know. I didn't really understand his connection to the city until Summer started asking me about it, because I'm just so used to Jimi Hendrix being so universally elevated that, right? Like, it wouldn't be out of place to see a mural of his in Moscow or Stockholm or, Tashkent. But she asked, and it turns out, yeah, I think that he's got like an actual connection to Canada that's legit, in Vancouver specifically.
I was watching, and I'll be brief because I know we want to get into the show. This is definitely more of a champagne room conversation. I was watching the Rick James documentary that Sasha Jenkins did, that you and I watched about a year or so ago, Pascal, and then invited the late Greg Tate on the show because we wanted to discuss it. And if you guys want to see Pascal and I get blindsided by Afro-pessimism, please take a look at that show. Because I definitely wanted to get more into a discussion of Rick James. Like, when I think of guys that redefine instruments and redefine music genres, I definitely put Jimi Hendrix on that list. Rick James is somewhere on that list for me for redefining what funk music could be. He's somewhere in the middle of Chic and Parliament Funkadelic. I wish we really could have got deep into that conversation had he not slapped us upside the head with an ode to Frank Wilderson. I was so not ready for that at all. Kuba, you were not on that show, lucky for you, but Derek Varn was, and he instigated all of it.
I mean, Varn heightens the contradictions. He's reliably doctrinary in that way.
Also being Black Sean King.
Well, before we get to you guys' pressing news stories of the week, have any of you or anyone in the chat heard of Martin Muotu?
Muotu?
Pascal?
No.
Muotu.
Am I supposed to?
You Muotu. Just kidding. He's a big-time real estate investor in SoCal, and he and his company Sola are single-handedly trying to aid in California's housing crisis by creating housing for formerly homeless and Section 8 people. He has become the darling of LA Mayor Eric Garcetti and Oprah Winfrey because he is rehabilitating LA rental properties in economically strapped areas of Southern California. This past fall, he opened a new construction, the Avalon Apartments, 28 units built without taxpayer money in half the time and half the cost. But can a for-profit model actually help solve the housing crisis? According to the LA Times, the day after the opening of the nonprofit, Inner City Law Center alleged in a suit that Sola exposed tenants in one of its buildings to health and safety threats on a daily basis, including long-term infestations of rats and cockroaches, severe water damage, destabilizing walls and ceilings, rampant mold, while the company's principals have lined their own pockets with rental payments by skimping on necessary repairs and regular maintenance. Muotu was able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars of social impact capital. Have you guys heard of that?
Oh, yes.
Where private investors put up money for a public good. This enabled Muotu's Sola to go on a 5-year buying spree in economically depressed areas in Southern California. The private equity model on its surface may look like a smart and efficient solution, but Sola has been named in many labor-related lawsuits. As you can imagine, there is skimping on upkeep of the buildings, many labor violations, not using union labor, and so on, coupled with numerous complaints filed against Sola for rent violations. So what does this mean for the future of Sola? Are the red flags being raised being listened to? Well, when we're talking about poor and working class or poor and homeless people, not too many people really want to hear their complaints. By doing good, the doing good by doing good model is one that is still a favorite of liberal elites everywhere. Sola has announced a $50 million commitment from the California State Teachers Retirement System to its latest enterprise. You'll love this one, Pascal. The Black Impact Fund that has raised $270 million from investors, including PayPal Holdings and Skoll Foundation. Social impact funding is a great way to launder a reputation, and by renting to Section 8 tenants, you're getting guaranteed rent from people that more often than not don't have the ability to protect themselves against such rental violations. Becoming the largest home and multi-unit builder in an area like SoCal goes a long way to rolling back worker protections and paying much less than the prevailing wage.
So, is it safe to say, and I think we know the answer here, this is a wonderful example of those dreaded public-private partnerships that we talk about often on this show as a kind of hallmark of neoliberalism, where we have the state surrendering state functionality to private corporate actors or fusing with private corporate actors, usually to the financial benefit of private corporate actors, to provide services that normally would have been demanded of the state. And as we're not surprised here, because the private corporate actors have no fiduciary duty to the public, because their fiduciary duty is to their shareholders, they are able to cut corners in ways that, not surprisingly, let down the public who demands the service that they're being charged to take care of.
And also keep in mind, unlike someone like Randy Shaw, who has a contract with the city, he has to take on the people that the city deem are can stay in his housing. So you're taking on literally the most vulnerable. You're taking on people that have the most mental issues, drug addictions. So when Randy takes that on, he doesn't have a say so who gets to stay in the place. He really can't turn people away. This guy can.
And I think that this is another case, and even if it isn't technically structured as a public-private partnership, it has the same characteristics, where the state reduces risks, eliminates barriers, basically serves as an assistant in order to get both capital, private capital, for its political goals, but also to secure expertise, labor, capabilities that have atrophied in the public sector. Good luck getting a public corporation or a public body to build affordable housing. If you do that, then it's never going to happen. Not because government can't do it in principle. Other governments do it, no problem. Look at Singapore, which is in many ways a conservative poster boy. But governments in the West, and particularly the US government, have surrendered so much of their own capabilities to operate in the physical economy in any way that you have to go through some private body. And these private public partnerships, that's what they provide for governments, an opportunity to say that they've done something without actually needing to do anything, since you're working through a private agency that can recoup its costs through all kinds of shady market-based ways, often augmented by tax dollars through subsidies or other programs.
No, it was an interesting story that I figured would get a little more traction, but I guess no one's really talking about housing in Los Angeles that much. But Los Angeles, or California in general, is kind of an example of how expensive public housing or low-income housing can be to build. I think they said the average cost of a unit is about $600,000 per unit of low-income housing, and this gentleman and his Sola company are building it for about half that, about $275,000 to $300,000, and they're getting it done in about half the time. But they are coming up. There were people protesting out front with bags of cockroaches and rat-infested apartments. So
this is disturbing, man.
Oh, 600 people that were working for one of his developments all filed complaints for, no breaks, calling them independent contractors when they weren't. It was kind of insane to read about all the things they were doing, but when you can get stuff done that quick, someone's getting stepped on somewhere, right?
Right. Well, you know what this meshes very well into in terms of subject matter, Jason?
Yes, I do.
The wonderful reality that because we are now in a time of inflationary price rises, and we're in a situation where, because the Federal Reserve has been such a significant role in providing for what has been deemed the economic recovery since the 2008 economic crash, with both quantitative easing and extremely low interest rates, being no surprise to many who have been watching the economy, who have sadly been adversely affected by the rising cost of goods and services, the Federal Reserve has now decided to raise interest rates to 0.75% to be exact. This is being the largest rate in recent history. And what this is going to do is basically have a very adverse effect on people who are interested in basically buying homes right now, because mortgage interest rates are probably going to go up as well. And those of us who are being able to benefit from relatively low rates, refinance as well, or acquire homes, are going to sadly be burdened with higher rates, which is going to make the whole prospect of buying homes and property much more. But what is something that is more dubious to me about this interest rate hike is a conversation I was having with Derek Vaughan about how is the Federal Reserve using interest rate hikes as a backdoor way to discipline labor in the wake of the fact that because of COVID, we've had a more worker friendly kind of job market in terms of workers being able to demand their own wage and find their own way in a tighter labor market. And because we understand that in the eyes of capital and banking, having labor and workers be able to have their own way and make their own choices to their benefit is not good in the eyes of capital and the market, it's not illogical that the Federal Reserve and banking institutions overall are looking for a way to discipline labor and dissuade them from their capacity to be able to exercise as much free will and choice in their ability to find work and find wages by using an increase in interest rates. So one of the questions I'm asking is this a backdoor way that the Fed is using to basically punish labor for the kind of advantages that they've been able to gain in the kind of post-COVID economic era? And also, what is the long-term strategy here, since the Fed has already admitted that they was kind of short to recognize the danger of inflation up front, but now they are willing to go full gung-ho in terms of raising rates? Are they going to pull back on quantitative easing as well? Because as we know, Yanis Varoufakis believes that one of the signs of his proposed techno-feudalism theory is that the Fed is never going to pull back on quantitative easing. If we're expecting them to do that also, does that mean that the storied belief that we have changed to a new form of capitalism would have been evaporated as well, and then we're back to the bad old days of neoliberalism? What exactly does this inflationary tendency that we're seeing in front of us mean overall in terms of the long term? Are we on the mark of a new recession coming forward? These are all questions that are still up in the air while the Federal Reserve is playing with people's lives, raising rates and trying to discipline labor. And at the same time, we still have companies that since 2008 and a period of quantitative easing were able to make millions in terms of profitability by doing stockholder buybacks, as well as being able to play the parity trade and invest using interest rates that were low in America and lend them out at higher areas in other parts of the world. So I'd like to hear what you guys think about this in terms of the rate hike and the overall prospect of what's going on economically.
I think that it's an interesting case to look at the rate hike as a form of labor discipline. It certainly has that effect. You increase interest rates, you're going to drive up unemployment, which is going to erode the bargaining position of workers. That's a very tight and very well understood relationship. Whether or not that was the principal reason, I think, is more up for debate. It certainly will have the effect of imposing discipline on labor, which I think it's a feature, not a bug, for many people in policymaking circles. But when you look at the economic behavior in different sectors, especially venture capital and crypto, in the run-up to through the Trump boom and then the stimulus period, you had, as a result of this access to easy, low-interest money, tremendous speculative bubbles built up. The most notable, of course, being NFT, Bored Ape Yacht Club, cryptocurrencies in general, which have tanked. And I think that movement also shows that there are certain speculative asset classes that can only survive in low interest rate environments. And we might be heading towards the extinction of certainly NFTs, perhaps also cryptocurrencies, as the easy money that kept the infrastructure afloat and kept attracting more investors, kind of sustaining a pyramid scheme, that'll have dried up. And we'll see what other sectors are also vulnerable in this kind of environment.
Well, I definitely know I've read articles showing that Fed Chairman Powell has been concerned about the last unemployment numbers that show it to be rather favorable to the workforce.
And one thing about the work number, one thing about labor rates as well, I'm uncertain to what extent there's hidden unemployment in the United States. One way of hiding a sizable unemployed population is through using disability benefits as a kind of backdoor relief scheme, which does double duty. One, certain people can get at least some kind of subsistence income or income supplement through the program. So it does have a humanitarian function in that respect. But it also redefines you out of unemployment and into a different category, a different demographic category. So while you can have changes in unemployment that reflect more people getting hired, you can also have an improved picture of unemployment that has more to do with moving the long-term unemployed into new statistical categories. And I think that COVID has covered up more of this movement that actually really started in the 90s with deindustrialization. And we'll see to what extent you'll have continued willingness to spend money on programs, disability programs, which are fundamentally welfareist, but are useful to Republicans and Democrats alike in that they juke the stats on unemployment and allow the system to claim that it provides better outcomes for workers than it actually does. But if there's an unwillingness to spend that money, it's a humanitarian disaster, because I think we're talking about a population of several million in the United States that have come to depend on this for livelihood, and the alternatives, especially in a high interest rate, brutalized job market, are going to be very grim. I think that you could have I don't think this is necessarily going to be the 1970s and stagflation. This could be the 1930s as well, or could be something entirely new but equally terrible.
I don't think anyone is ever. I mean, in the 1930s, we were talking about periods of 25% unemployment in the United States.
The 25% unemployment at a point where there was no cushion, right? There was, if you were unemployed, no disability, no unemployment insurance, no way to mask that reality. It was soup kitchens. One of the affinities between government welfare spending and neoliberal economics is that it is more efficient from a market perspective for peak capitalist interests to dedicate a proportion of the collective budget, especially one that comes out of taxes on consumers and comes out of taxes on working class and middle class people, as well as on peak interests. It's better to devote that to some very basic palliative care for a population which would otherwise be a visible proof of the profound indifference to human life at the heart of the system.
Well, one of the things that Vaughn was talking about is how some of the earlier, more Mises Institute conservatives, the more reactionary, even further than libertarian types, didn't trust the Milton Friedman types because they thought they wanted to implement a welfare state. The von Mises Institute types.
Absolutely. There's the von Mises Institute,
Right.
and the ultra Hayekian sort of Alan Greenspan, Milton Friedman set represent two distinct poles in reactionary right-wing economics. One, which is the economics first Milton Friedman system, basically thinks that as long as the system is efficient, then there'll be enough money around to sort of put the losers in palliative care, provide a universal basic income. The system is worth these types of measures to sustain because the system is so much more productive. Like, sure, you're not going to have poor people starving on the streets, which is a drawback for the von Mises people, but at least you're going to be so much more wealthy than before. You're going to be Mars colony wealthy. You're going to be your own space program wealthy rather than merely seasteading wealthy. The von Mises people, they're interesting because they are more upfront or more conscious of the fundamentally political role of economic models and economic programs. That the point of the market economy isn't to be as productive as possible. It isn't to create wealth, but it's to establish hierarchy, to create lords and to create peasants. And if you are just going to hand out money to the peasants, then you're destroying the validity of the system, because it's there to entrench the social and political position of the leading classes, not as a general productivity boost, which will happen to benefit them disproportionately.
Straight people going to be needing the machete and the Mau Mau and the guillotine.
I did not say that, but I think that, yeah, in some ways the von Mises plan was to replace the reactionary elements of the reactionary means of coercion, right? The executioner, the stocks, right? The chains, the shackles, with an economic hierarchy that is more durable because it's more humane seeming, while still effectively preserving the domination of certain classes over others.
Well, Kuba, what do you have for us in global affairs?
Okay, I'm gonna save my take on Top Gun for the champagne room.
Did you watch the new Top Gun?
Oh, I didn't have to, right? I know I lived it. Like,
which part? The volleyball part?
The having to listen to fighter pilots talk about how great they are part.
I did hear a lot of rah-rah shit.
Wasn't Top Gun a bit before your time there, Kuba?
Top Gun, the original, was, I was too young for it, but my sister was in the perfect sort of Tom Cruise fangirl demographic. So I ended up getting involuntary, right, like secondhand exposure. I got secondhand Top Gun, you know. They caused secondhand patriotism, secondhand fetishization of fighter pilots. It goes on like that. It's pretty dangerous.
Because we're not too far apart in age. You have to admit, after you watched Top Gun, you hella wanted to be a pilot after you watched Top Gun, didn't you?
No, I wanted to be a volleyball player. I don't know what you were looking at.
Pascal doesn't remember that movie, so he does not remember that
I
scene.
remember Top Gun. I remember it was perceived to be very good.
You don't remember the volleyball scene.
I remember I was young when it came out.
Danger zone.
I did not associate the volleyball scene at the time with what everyone did later on.
I didn't either. I was just like, this is a very intense game of volleyball. Everybody's kind of ripped. Watched Top Gun as an adult and couldn't stop laughing.
Just like get a room, guys.
Playing with the boys. Yeah. I love playing with the boys.
The romantic heterosexual love interest, so superfluous. It's like every scene she shows up and it's like, okay, what do I have to do to get you out of here? Gotta go back to playing it with the boys. But I'll save that for the champagne room. That was just a little taste.
Conversation, definitely. But yeah, I didn't realize that. Just like Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
But there are two topics that I wanted to flag, both on the diplomatic front. One is the recently concluded Summit of the Americas in LA. I
was going to choose that as a subject matter, but something told me that you would bring it up.
You know your co-hosts. The summit was supposed to be the centerpiece of Joe Biden's America is Back diplomatic reboot, connecting with countries that largely depend on the United States, that have a significant diplomatic, political, economic imbalance with the United States. Basically assemble a collective audience for a return to the platitudes and bromides of the Clinton-Obama style of international engagement, and perhaps sign a few public-private partnerships to assist poor Central American countries as a show that you're serious about tackling regional issues. This summit was hamstrung from the start by the Biden administration's refusal to include every government in the Americas as in the representation in Los Angeles. Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua were all excluded from participation in the summit. And that triggered the downgrading of Mexico's participation. AMLO refused to attend a summit which would exclude significant regional partners based solely on America's dislike for those governments, and reduced the representation from head of state level down to ministers and other civil servants. The outcome of the summit, which was pitched domestically and regionally as the immigration summit, an opportunity to collectively, regionally deal with the causes of migration, and from an American perspective, find ways to regularize and restrict the flow of migrants across the U.S. southern border. It's been the typical patchwork of reform packages that you'd expect from a democratic government. Some international development aid for the countries that are the source of most of the asylum seekers and migrants that make their way to the United States, but also millions of dollars to Mexico, Costa Rica, and other transit countries in order to encourage them to hold immigrants locally rather than facilitating or incentivizing their movement further north to the United States. So as much of a developmental project as this is, it's also a coercive and surveillance-based model on to prevent migrants from reaching the United States. I think that this will be treated as the nothing burger that it is, similar to the disability payments of the Clinton era instead of a robust labor market or a robust plan for unemployment and poverty. There's some palliative efforts which will make the lives of some migrants better. A scheme to increase the number of seasonal, non-seasonal farm worker visas for workers in the United States, for instance, and money to help stricken regional governments. But ultimately, it will not rebalance the relationship of the economies of Latin America with the United States. And it will not do anything to create a more durable basis for economic growth and local development in the countries that are most seriously impacted by every aspect of the contemporary crisis, be it climate change, be it international drug trafficking, be it neoliberal extractive economic interests, or be it American Washington consensus-based policy prescriptions, which continue to limit the autonomy and ability of local governments to address the needs of their own population. Instead, looking after peak international interests and limited by agreements made with previous trade treaties, international governing bodies for investors to pursue claims against sovereign governments for entirely domestic policy changes. I believe that under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, or one of its successor treaties, Philip Morris successfully sued the government of Uruguay for lost profits because of an anti-smoking campaign that was embarked on by that government. So the straitjacket that creates the crises that trigger waves of migrants to move north to the United States, that remains an untreated wound, and all that we get out of the Summit of the Americas is some palliative care and a course of antibiotics.
Well, cool. I wanted to ask you a more atmospheric question about the summit regarding to how was it perceived in the overall media stratosphere that so many of these countries that, considered to dare to defy the United States in terms of challenging the U.S. prerogative of who should or should not be there. We're talking about having satellite kind of summits of their own, the People's Summit, or protesting. I know Black Alliance for Peace as an organization put out a major commentary about, the United States doesn't have the moral justification to be making any types of demands in terms of who or who should not participate as a summit. And from what I understand, that the overall it definitely did not cause the exuding of strength on the part of America, Empire, Biden, or what have you, overall, in terms of the way the summit transpired in the end. Is there any truth to the rumblings I'm hearing from the more radical, revolutionary left comrades on terms of how this went down?
No, I think that's an entirely fair assessment. That as a project of international diplomacy itself, regardless of its outcomes, regardless of the resolution of the summit, the meeting was a nothing burger, a failure. it was supposed to be this return to form, but without a tangible achievement in the international sphere, without some justification for the claim of leadership that the United States is making. These types of events have a very hollow, ritualistic character to them. Something similar like a 1983 meeting of the Soviet and fraternal communist party leaders, that you know exactly who's going to be there. The event itself there will be no surprises, and the best you can hope for is that you don't lose face. I think that the timing here was particularly bad, and the U.S. did end up appearing weak. For instance, they couldn't get AMLO to go. And I'm not necessarily a fanboy of the Mexican president, but that was
supposed to be Mexican Bernie. What's your problem? It's like Bernie in Mexico.
Well, depending on who you ask, it's Mexican Trump, Mexican Putin, Mexican Chavez.
I would not say Chavez. Like later years Chavez.
Mexican Maduro, Mexican Castro, Mexican Enver Hoxha. Yeah. I'm just listing names at this point.
But I remember when he got elected, and there was a lot of people in the more liberal sphere of media, even more mainstream media, that was saying that this was a big win for Mexico, that they finally got a lot of the corruption out of office and got a real deal man of the people in there. And we've done a little bit of coverage on AMLO, and as you guys know, we won't be talking too much about Mexico as long as I live here. These niggas ain't killing me. But AMLO has not been what they thought he was.
Is he pivoted to the right? Well, we don't want to have to talk about that at the moment. But I mean, it's interesting. It seems like he's able to play both sides of the board against each other, depending on what the subject matter is. Like when it was COVID, when it was immigration, when it was Biden's policy towards Mexico, when it was Biden's need for oil. It's like he selectively plays whatever the issue is to try to see if he can come out on top. So I can't really get a read on the guy, to be very honest.
And I think that's the point. I think that's also his genius, right? In some ways, he is similar to Donald Trump in that I don't think that there's inherent commitment to a particular project. He is a political survivor. He's going to tactically win on an issue by issue basis. Fight each news cycle, and consistency or durability are secondary considerations. Ultimately, I think that it'll be years before we can assess him, because it's going to be such a chaotic mess what he does. Sometimes he'll be tacking to the right, sometimes he'll be veering to the left, and his responses to big issues, where a lot of what political leaders do is fundamentally constrained by things like the international bond market or the makeup of their own civil service, structural factors that they can do little about. This really narrows their freedom of movement. They occasionally, however, an opportunity comes up where they do freely decide one way or another. For instance, AMLO could have gone to this summit or not. That is up to him, and he chose not to, out of national pride and a certain leftist solidarity, which is not nothing. But
so you see it as more of a strategic move on his part.
I mean, I think that Salvador Allende taught every Latin American leader that you have to be making nothing but strategic moves. If he isn't thinking about this strategically, then I'd short his stock. And but I think that he correctly recognizes that the United States is weak and that he gains more domestically by exploiting that than
Say it again for the people in the back.
He has more to gain strategically exploiting that than he can by currying favor with the American president. I think that anybody who's been paying attention since Barack Obama's second term and the response to the Iran nuclear deal has to accept that the American president is weak diplomatically. Don't trust anything that you can't get cash in hand in the short term. Therefore, if you can score some points with your own voters versus getting the undying appreciation of what may very well be a one-term president, go with the home crowd every time.
Well, he just had a whatchamacallit election in April that he won. What do you call it? Not a recall.
Parliamentary?
There was some sort of election in April because there was AMLO posters everywhere, even here where I'm at.
I'm not sure what the recent election was. It could have been regional, or was it a national election? Oh,
it was
no, it was a recall. Apparently, it was Mexico's first ever recall election.
Yeah.
And the I don't know how they managed to engineer the election itself, but his victory was decisive. And
everywhere, all the taxi cabs had AMLO posters on them. There was AMLO posters everywhere, even in my neighborhood, which is a very small area. Was littered with AMLO posters.
There's one other point that I wanted to make on American diplomacy generally, and that is the war in Ukraine has shifted policy priorities decisively. That's one reason why I think the LA summit was such a nothing burger. The attention of the American political establishment has decisively shifted towards great power competition, and Latin America has become a backwater. Again, what's interesting is that previous eras of American neglect of Latin America have been when American hemispheric dominance was much more secure. Now, it feels as though the United States is underinvesting in regional leadership as more and more governments are willing and able to experiment with heterodox domestic policies and international entanglements with America's rivals, especially China. Meanwhile, the next major visit by Biden diplomatically has been announced, and he will be traveling to Israel and Saudi Arabia next month. Exactly. It looks like MBS is coming in from the cold.
Hey, it's interesting. Some interesting scuttlebutt about that.
And what is that?
Go on.
Well, are you familiar with the statements that Biden made about MBS, that Biden made about Saudi Arabia in 2020 when he was running, about how they are beyond the pale, and he personally accused MBS of assassinating Khashoggi, the journalist who was disemboweled, literally, I believe, in the state embassy at the time, and Biden basically pointed the finger at Mohammed bin Salman and said he was the culprit. Oh. So it's fascinating how for the last couple of months MBS has been like, yo, man, screw you, baby. We're not. You can't come visit. No, we don't want to see you. No, man, we're not interested, Papi.
Screw you.
Has not been entertaining Biden's demands for a visitation in the wake of needs for oil production. Don't forget, it's not like we're in like 2021 where we had like $75 a barrel oil and everyone was flush producing, grade A level sweet pure crude. There's a shortage going on, and the United States needs people to produce oil. Well, the Saudis have been kind of tap dancing like they're back in the Russians in the recent conflagration, and they have not shown themselves to pump that oil the way the U.S. has wanted. So the United States is playing catch up in terms of getting that audience with Mohammed bin Salman, and also this is about Yemen too, Papi, because the United States has been unwilling to, yo, man, those M16s cost money, man. We want those guns, baby. We got to put those Yemenis on hot coal and put them in check. And the United States has not been willing to sell those weapons, and the Saudis are not happy about that.
I love your Saudi Arabian, Puerto Rican Telly Savalas.
That's what it is. That you nailed it. You nailed it. Like I want to see that Diners Club commercial. But there's an interesting article in Politico about the diplomatic run-up to the Saudi Arabia visit. It has the same trajectory or the same elements as the story you lay out, but the narrative that it settles on is more about this kind of rehabilitation of MBS, that it's okay to be friends with him now because the U.S. needs the oil.
It's in the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, there was one in the Atlantic and there was one in Politico.
Glenn Greenwald tweeted it sarcastically, as a matter of fact.
And it does point to the fact that the way that Joe Biden talks about not just MBS, but also Vladimir Putin, he really savors the ability to get on his moral high horse and paint a rival foreign leader as monstrous evil, and then we're good, we're America, we stand up for the right thing. And it's this reflective flashback to a emotionally and psychologically comfortable era when the United States just won World War II against an unambiguously evil geopolitical force, that there were entire countries that literally looked up, that really believed in American leadership and the American promise for a better shared future. Wouldn't it be nice if that were true? And in those moments when Biden is calling a foreign leader a murderer and threatening to do something about it, I think he makes it true for himself. And, good for him, because he's old. It's not going to run much longer.
Well, on that note, we have gone over our hour segment. We will be continuing this conversation and taking your phone calls with the other part of the show that gets to have a voice, everyone's favorite moderator, M. Toussaint. So if you want to be a part of that, patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. Become a patron, call in, tell us what you think about what Pascal had to say about inflation, Kuba had to say about the nothing burger. It is the summit of the Americas. And there was a lot of talk about Mexico. We won't be talking about Mexico. Remember, I live here now. You can't do it. All I have to say is Mexico's great. Leadership's fine.
A-okay. Nothing to see here, people. No need to
Who needs
investigate.
water? I mean, I've been using a bucket.
Yo, you don't want to say nothing bad about the Mexicans, my brother.
No, I don't. So on that note, we'll be staying alive. We'll see you guys in a little bit. We are out.